Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 10 o'clock p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta, Friday night, April 27th. And this is Child Abuse Prevention is Up to Us. We're on for half an hour, live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And the chat room's open if anybody would like to sit in there. I just appreciate everybody who's tuned into my shows. You know, I've been doing too many shows lately. I've been really sick, actually, but just a bad chest infection and sinus infection and stuff. But I'm getting a little bit better here and there, and doing a few shows here and there. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. I do check my show stats, and there's been a lot of people listening to my archives, and I appreciate it. My shows are depressing. You know, I'm talking about abuse. It's a sensitive subject. You know, you have to be aware of what you're okay to listen to, right? Especially age appropriately. If you're 18 and under, I just ask that you not listen to my shows. My shows are really quite, you know, explicit, quite graphic and disturbing. I'm talking about child abuse, talking about domestic violence and abuse and violence and whatnot. So, you know, if you're 18 and under, just have somebody listen to the show with you who's older, who's an adult, who can help you make a decision whether you should be listening or not. And it's not for younger children, that's for sure. And, you know, if you're somebody who's listening who's an adult and you're just sensitive to material that's about abuse, you know, make sure you don't listen to my shows. You know, I just don't sugarcoat it. I just tell it like it is. And so, you know, it's quite disturbing material. And all the you know, I've done about 900 shows, and all my shows are quite disturbing at some point because I'm talking about some serious stuff here. This is not a joke. Like, this was not a joke my whole life growing up. This isn't a joke for these kids out here who are being abused, and you know, it's serious stuff. And so it has to be talked about, and it has to be talked about truthfully. And a lot of times people like to sugarcoat abuse, you know, make it sound like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, or you know, they got to skirt around the issues because they're afraid they're going to offend somebody. But what offends me is child abuse. That's what offends me, is the actual fact that people abuse children. That's offensive to me. I'm not talking about it. You know, it's like, so I think that people just need to get their priorities straight, you know. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it. You know, I think about this all the time because I'm left with the aftermath of growing up abused and having, you know, seen a lot of violence, a lot of horrific stuff, and just the knowledge of so much, you know, suffering and so much trauma, really, in my own family the whole time I was growing up, and then just having to deal with it as an adult. You know, it's been incredibly hard, and I know so I know so many survivors out there who have a hard time, you know, and it's not easy. It's not easy to be a survivor of child abuse. It's not easy to keep going, and a lot of people think, oh, okay, you just get over it. You know, you should be able to just get over it, right? And it's like, well, you know, sometimes it's a little easier than others. You know, I've had years go by where things just didn't seem to affect me as much, and then I'll have years go by where everything bothers me about it, you know, and this is just cyclical curse upon my life, really, being born and brought up in an abusive home and then having to deal with the aftermath. And, you know, anything can trigger it, like anything. And, you know, I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about this, but this last week, just being sick, like the week before, I was really sick the week before. Now, this last week I've been feeling a little bit better, but the week before I was really ill, and then when I'm sick and down, it triggers me automatically. It just makes me think of all the times I was sick as a child, from being abused, from being beaten on, and from being, you know, sexually abused. The aftermath of that, the stuff that it did to my body, you know. So when I'm sick, it automatically takes me back to that place, you know. And so it's hard, and then I get mad because I'm like, I shouldn't be sick. I shouldn't be allowed to be sick, you know. Like, I wasn't really allowed to be sick as a child. I wasn't, you know, given any kind of care or comfort or anything like that as a child. So, you know, it's all this stuff sort of hangs around being sick for me, you know. And so when I get sick, I'm generally triggered quite a bit. And then last Wednesday was a triggering day for me, and I had the day before my abuser dad, who's almost 90, was trying to sort of see if I was home, and I spotted him and sort of, you know, hid from him so he wouldn't see me. And because I'm really avoiding him, and that was very triggering. So it's been a hard, couple of weeks actually. I've been doing a whole lot of thinking about my past and about what happened to me as a child, and then I think about these kids out here, tonight and tomorrow, right? Yesterday, who aren't going to get any help. They will not receive any help. They're going to be abused. They're going to be killed. They're going to be murdered. They're going to be, if they're not killed and murdered, they're going to suffer from the abuse that they're being forced to endure. And it's sad. And it's tragedy. It never should happen. People say, well, that's just life. It's like, but it doesn't have to be. Abuse is a choice, right? Why are people choosing to do this stuff to their children? That's why I talked about this for 900 shows, because I really wanted people to see the whole picture of what my parents were going through, why they did what they did, pretty much not to excuse their behavior, but just to show the fact that, so many times it's learned behavior, or it's just sheer hatred for the child, or hatred for the partner, or hatred for the wife or the husband, or whatever. Hatred for the children. A lot of times there's a lot of anger involved, and justified anger where the abusers will feel justified in doing what they're doing. There's stories in the newspaper that pop up, headlines and stuff about children being abused, from whatever age, whether it's, toddler to or infant to, to teenagers, like kids being abused because they took $5 out of their parents' wallet, kids being murdered for taking a muffin off the stove, this type of stuff. Like my parents were vicious in their punishment, in their discipline. They would call it discipline, but it's actually abuse. It's not discipline. It was like, you're going to pay, and I'm going to make you pay, and you're going to hurt, and I'll do it again. So that was they felt justified in what they were doing, and they always felt justified in what they were doing. And I was talking about that last Sunday, actually, on the show. Mount Bethel Christian Bible Study, just talking about the fact that, they would never take responsibility for what they did. They always blamed it on somebody else. Oh, well, it was the era, it was the times, it was this or it was that, It's like a lot of times abusers will do that. They'll just put the blame on something else instead of taking responsibility for it. Abuse is a choice. People are choosing to do this stuff, And so, I had a headache all day just from a sinus headache because I'm still sick, right? And my headache, every time I get a headache, it reminds me of the massive headache that I had when my mom cracked my head open with a rolling pin, which I talk a lot about and also wrote about in my book, A Life of Death, The Redemption. And that's triggering for me. Yeah, that's what these little abused kids out here will have to go through for the rest of their life. Is the knowledge of having been abused. Right? It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. No child should ever have to deal with that. No child should ever have those types of memories, Like that should not be happening. But it is. And so much of society says, well, we can't change it. We're not going to be able to fix it, so let's just not worry about it. So what do we tell these little kids out here? Too bad, sorry. We're too lame and too lazy and too uncommitted to try to find the answers, to try to save your life. So sorry about that. Or to try to keep you from being sexually abused. Isn't that just too bad? It's so pathetic. I mean, it really is. It's so pathetic. And really people say, well, what am I supposed to do? I got to work. I got to pay bills. I can't volunteer all my time away. And no, of course not. That's the problem. Therein lies the problem, right? It's the system is screwed, right? It's the whole thing. It's not just what one group is doing that's not working. The whole thing is screwed. And we all are accountable for it. So we can all take accountability for this and say, what, sorry kids, we're too busy trying to do other things and make a living, so you are just going to have to suffer on and be raped and killed and murdered, and you're just going to have your head smashed in by your parent. You're just going to have to be raped by so-and-so, the neighbor or your somebody in your family. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. Because we're not reaching the abusers, right? People out here who are advocating against child abuse, we're not reaching the abusers. We're reaching the people that care about children, which is great. But the thing is that we're not reaching the people we need to be reaching, which is these abusers out here, or potential abusers who are so stressed out that they're going to, or whatever reason they decide they're going to, or so horny or whatever, that they're going to abuse their child or abuse somebody else's child. We're not reaching those guys. And those are the people that we need to reach, sadly enough, even when there is reports made and there is, somebody stepping in, whether it's CPS or DHS or whoever, some Child Protective Services group steps in, half the time nothing's done anyway, right? I'm a victim of that. My parents were brought up on charges. My parents were both brought up on charges. Had to go to court, almost lost us. The courts decided to leave us in the home because my mom begged and pleaded with the courts. Oh, we'll get all the things done that we're supposed to do, and we'll go to counseling, and don't take my children. I love my children. It's like, so the courts went for it. The courts bought that, right? They bought it. They bought it. Well, they bought it lock, stock, and barrel, right? My mom was lying through her teeth, and that's the sad part. So many abusers do. I'll get help. I won't abuse my child anymore. I'll get help, and or my wife or whoever they're abusing or my husband. And do they get help? No, because it's a lifestyle. It's what they like. It's what they choose. It's a lifestyle that they choose for themselves. My parents loved violence. They loved it. They got off on it. If it was quiet in our house, they weren't happy. They had to have some sort of a fight going on all the time. And whether even not in the house, could be at the grocery store, driving down the street, whatever, wherever. Had to be some sort of battle going on, or they weren't happy, right? Had to be some sort of horrible thing. My mom had to be thinking about killing herself or killing me in order to be happy, right? So that's the way it went, because my parents were mentally ill and emotionally ill and psychologically ill, and they were screwed up, right? So many of these people out here, who abuse children, whether they're young or old, doesn't really matter. It's what they choose. It's the lifestyle they choose. They like that. They think it's great to be able to bash their child around or call their child names or use their child sexually in some way, right? That's what people get off on, right? Like, this is incredibly wrong, and we're not reaching these people. And even when you do, they're so screwed up in the head, how are you going to get them to stop abusing or hurting their children or somebody else's child? This is a sickness, people. This is a real sickness. And the sad thing is that, 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 3 to 4 girls, this is the stats, pretty well out there everywhere you look, and 1 in 6 to 7 boys, depending on where you look, on this, as far as federally funded, stats, federally funded programs go for stats. 1 in 3 to 4 girls, 1 in 6 to 7 boys will be sexually abused in some way under the age of 18, and that goes for the other types of abuse too, except for neglect is really the highest. But 1 in 3 to 4 girls and 1 in 6 to 7 boys for abuse. I mean, that's ridiculous under the age of 18. This tells you how many abusers are out there, and these are people you work with, and they probably have some song and dance. Oh, my life is so horrible, like my husband's not supporting me. I have no support from so and so. And the kids are driving me crazy. They got some sort of excuse. My mom always had a great excuse, for why, she was behaving the way that she was. Right? It's somebody else's fault, It wasn't her fault that she took that rolling pin and bashed my head in and cracked my skull open and then spit in my face and threw me out of the house, It wasn't her doing. That was somebody else. He was like, no, she did it. And she was happy about it, and she wanted to do it, and she just wanted to kick my ass, that's all. And she wanted to make sure that she hurt me really extremely well, so she did. And, she was perfectly felt justified in that, And that's just how abusers feel, Somebody else is making them do it because they hate their life, or they hate their family, or they hate their children, or whatever, or they hate their husband or wife, or whatever the situation may be. Right? Take it out on everybody else around them. And generally, it's children, right? Well, how do you reach these people? It's a big question. I think that more money needs to be going into finding out how to reach these people, And what do you do with these kids even when you do remove them from the homes, You go into foster care and end up being abused in a lot of foster homes. Not every foster home. Everybody knows that there's good foster homes out there. Just like everybody knows there's good parents out there. I'm not talking about good parents, and I'm not talking about good foster homes. I'm talking about abuse. Right? So let's just keep our things straight here. We're talking about abuse. So obviously I'm not talking about good foster homes or good parents. There's good parents out there, and there's good foster homes. There's people that do care. But there's a whole lot of people that don't. There's horrible homes where children are being abused. There's horrible situations where strangers are getting a hold of children and abusing them. There's horrible situations where foster care, foster parents are abusing the children, institutional abuse. It's all there. It's all still happening, right? And how do you change that? Like, this is a serious problem. It's so rampant, and the problem being it's been going on for so long. But it's individual people that decide one day, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to hurt that. I'm going to hurt this child, whether it's their own or somebody else, and they don't care. The abusers don't care. They don't care that they hurt that child. They never do care. My dad did not care what he did to his family. My dad did not care that he hurt his wife or that he hurt his children. My mother didn't care that she hurt her children or her husband. I mean, my mother used to bash my dad in the head with stuff, and she was violent. She was a very violent woman, but I don't blame her for bashing my dad in the head. He was always raping her and beating her up and stuff. I mean, he was a horrible man, and so I always used to take her side, even though she was my main abuser. I took her side because I knew what was right and what was wrong in that home, and I knew what my dad was doing was wrong to her. And so I couldn't sit there and say, well, that's what she deserves, even though my mother would tell me that's what I deserved when I was raped by my brother. But the thing is I didn't want to be like my mother because I wanted to keep my heart in a good place. And even when I was screwed up and so messed up, I always wanted truth to be truth, and truth is truth, And so I always took my mom's side, regardless, and for many reasons. I was trying to get in on her good side as well, but I knew what was wrong. And I knew what my dad was doing was wrong, to her and to the rest of us. And society knows that this stuff is wrong, and yet it's like, what? People still do it. People still abusing kids. They're still abusing children. Why? It's a choice. They're sick. They're obviously sick. Nobody in their right mind would do these things to a child. Nobody. How could you? You wouldn't be able to live with yourself. You wouldn't be able to face yourself. You wouldn't be able to do well in life at all if you were that type of person. These people are quite often very successful at what they do, and they love what they do. There's all kinds of really sick people out there hurting children in every way who feel completely justified, and they think it's perfectly fine. And it's incredibly sad, because we're not reaching those people because they don't care. They're not paying attention to the ads that say stop abusing children or you shouldn't abuse a child. They're just like, no, I'm going to go home and I'm going to kick my kid's ass, you know what I mean? Or I'm going to go home and I'm going to rape my child or sexually use my child or whatever, So sick and twisted. And these are the people, we work with them. We do. They live on the same streets you do. Why? Because 1 in 3 to 4 girls and 1 in 6 to 7 boys are being abused. So how many adults involved or even older children does that tell you are out there abusing children? A lot, right? If you think of the stats of the abused children and you think of who's actually doing this, which is, can be anybody. Anybody can be an abuser. It could be a parent, could be someone who's looking after the child, could be a babysitter, could be a sibling, could be a relative. Grandparents aren't left out of this. Lots of grandparents abuse children sexually and in every other way too. And, it's not just men or just women. It's like anybody can be an abuser. It's just a choice they make. And we work with these people. They're in the store shopping at the same time you are, I mean, it just makes me sick to my stomach, to think that somebody could do this stuff and then have friends outside of that. My parents had lots of friends. Like, they weren't the most popular couple, but they had like family friends who lived in the near area who would sort of condone their behavior, like sometimes they'd pick up for my mom and because they knew that my parents were fighting, and they'd be like, oh, Barb, if you need anything, you just let us know or whatever. But they knew how she was treating me, and they did nothing about it. So they knew my mother was abusing me and did nothing about it. They didn't care. They were just like, oh, well, because they cared more for my mom than they did for me. So that's the whole issue, right? When sometimes there's a victim in the house that people will rally around who is a victim for real, but they're also an abuser, and they'll let the abuse continue on because they have more in common or more invested in the victim, right? And so many times, children will be being sexually abused like I was, and, my mom would not do anything about it. No. She wouldn't do anything about it because she was being victimized. My dad was raping her and sexually abusing her and beating on her and treating her extremely bad. So she felt like, well, we're all getting what we get, you know. I'm not getting any help, you're not getting any help. So basically that was her answer, you know. And that can happen, you know. So many times parents won't do the right thing, right? So someone in the home won't do the right thing to get the child help, right? And it's incredibly wrong. But we know that this stuff happens. And how do you reach people? How do you get a hold of people that are potential abusers, they're going to potentially abuse their child, and stop it from happening? Right? I mean, it's people. That's why people just throw their hands up in the air and say, "Oh well," you know. What are we supposed to do? You know. I think that there needs to be more attention from the government agencies. I really think that they need to stop cutting positions and cutting funding and all that, and they need to pump more money into it. People say, well, you know, there's already billions and billions of dollars annually being pumped into the system, and we know that. Well, there needs to be billions and billions more, because these kids' lives should count for something, right? It's like, you know, it's just like saying, oh, well, we're going to lose so many, isn't that too bad? You know? Because these politicians don't matter to them. They might have a good heart and care, but it's no skin off their back. It's not their kid. It's not their child. It's not their 30,000 children ending up in some sort of care facility because of abuse. They don't care. You know, it's like, oh, that's sad, but, you know, we got other things to worry about. And, you know, so budget cuts, and I just saw an article out there actually today they were talking about making cuts, you know, in the system, right? Cutting positions, cutting back, right? And it's like, okay, so we're just going to tell these little kids, oh, sorry, we had to make cuts, budget cuts. It's all about the money. So you're just going to have to continue to be sexually abused. Sorry about that. Or, you know, so you're being beaten and burned and stabbed. It's just unfortunate. That's the way it goes. You know, people say, well, isn't it the parents' responsibility? Well, the parents are generally the ones abusing the children. A lot of people don't get that through their head. You know, my friend, I knew lots of kids who were abused when I was growing up. You know, I grew up in a kind of a lower income neighborhood, and a lot of kids' parents were having trouble with drinking and alcohol and drugs, you know, drug use and just a lot of problems and ignorance, you know, and people were, I don't know, just insane. And this was back in the 70s and really mainly the 60s and 70s. But a friend of mine's dad stabbed him in the back with a big switchblade and hit his kidney when he was 7 years old. And see, a lot of people think, how could a parent do that? Yeah, my mom beat the shit out of me on a regular basis and hurt me and spilled my blood. You know, literally, I mean, trashed me. You know, people would say, well, how can a parent do that? You know, my mom knew my brother was sexually abusing me and raping me and sexually using me, and she did nothing about it. People say, how could a parent do that? Yeah. How could a parent do that? My dad was beating on me. My dad was physically abusive towards me. You know, it's like, how could a parent do that? Well, they do, you know. And some people say, well, he must have been doing something to deserve that. You can't do something to deserve that. That's bad parenting. You know, if a child is driving a parent that crazy, it's like, you know, come on. I was just mimicking my parents mainly. I got beat for mimicking my parents. I got beat because my parents taught me how to behave, and then I got beat up for it, right? So, you know, I was just mimicking what I was taught. So, you know, it's like I had to pay the price because my parents were ignorant. So there you go. It's when people say, well, what parent would do that? Yeah, exactly. A lot of it's parents, you know, like I don't know if it's close to 40% of abuse within the home out of 95% is parent. The other, what is it, almost 40% is a sibling or an aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, somebody looking after the child. The other 5 to 10%, or depending how they break the stats down, is generally a stranger danger. You know, somebody or somebody outside the home. Right? So 90 to 95% of abuse happens within the home, and people just don't realize that because they just can't fathom. There's good people out there, you know, there's good parents out there who love their children and who would die for their children. They would give their lives for their child's life. You know, if they thought they could, that if they could sacrifice their own life for their own child so that their child could live, they would do it. You know, there's people out there that love their children and really care about them and would never hurt them intentionally. And, you know, if they hurt them on accident, they'd just feel devastated and they'd be like, oh my God, you know, like, you know, they would never intentionally hurt their child, right? Call them names and psychologically abuse them and physically abuse them and sexually abuse them. They just wouldn't do it. And so those people have a hard time understanding what it's like to grow up under somebody who hates your guts and wishes that you had been dead when you were born. Right? You know, it's like, okay, no, that's reality for me. That's my reality. And I have to live with that. You know, I